The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air magazines, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, and American Watercolor, and events the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra-high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists or our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link which says, See Everything We Do. Thank you. The following presentation is a gift from the team at Streamline Publishing, publishers of Fine Art Connoisseur, Plein Air magazine, and weekly newsletters Fine Art Today, Realism Today, Plein Air Today, and American Watercolor, and events the Plein Air Convention and the Figurative Art Convention. We offer over 400 different art instruction tutorials and ultra high-quality video by the world's leading artists. If you like what you see, help us support our artists and our team with your purchase. Each video aired has a special discount code for today only in the comments section with a link to the video offered. And to see everything we do, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, or if you want to receive notice of new releases, new products, and new events for artists, simply click the other link which says, See Everything We Do. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air magazine. Welcome, glad you're here. You're going to meet a great watercolor realist today. As a matter of fact, his video is called Watercolor Realism, Silver and Crystal. You're going to see how to make things look realistic. Meet Laurin McCracken.
Hello. I'm Laurin McCracken, and I'm an unabashed realist watercolorist. My paintings are highly influenced by the 15th, 16th, and 17th century Dutch and Flemish still life painters. While I paint other things other than still lifes, it's the thing I really enjoy painting. I set up my own still lifes, I photograph them, and then I work from the photographs to create the still lifes. The primary reason I do this is that when I have access to certain objects that would make for great paintings, I don't always have the time to actually start the painting. It may be months and sometimes even years before I get around to actually doing the painting. I'm an architect, and I suppose that's one of the reasons that I have a passion for the details in my still lifes. However, that doesn't explain it all, because I was the head of marketing for the last 40-something years of a 50-year career in architecture. It is interesting that that time in marketing has actually facilitated the development of my painting career. I believe that there are three aspects that make an artist an artist. Number one is seeing. Thoreau wrote that it doesn't matter what you look at, it's what you see that it's important. And that is particularly true in creating realism in any media, and in this case, particularly in watercolor. The second aspect is drawing. Drawing is fundamental to all art. And yes, you do have to be able to draw to watercolor. The third is the mastery of the techniques of the media you're involved with. And that is what this session is really all about, is mastering the techniques of watercolor. While seeing and drawing are integral to what we're going to be talking about, it is the mastery of the techniques of these instruments that is going to be our focus. The goal of all this is not to create a perfect painting or to create a painting that looks like it was painted by Laurin McCracken. The goal is for you to learn some techniques that then you can turn around and apply to your watercolors. I hope at some point you'll find that you need to do something and you aren't quite sure how you need to do it, but you think, Laurin showed me how to do that and then you proceed to do it successfully. It's not important that you finish the painting. What is important is that you go through all the various steps in creating this still life watercolor. Then you can decide as you go forward in your painting career which of these can be applicable to the way you want to paint when you need them, and hopefully they'll make your creation of a still life watercolor a lot more fun and a lot more interesting. Let's spend a few minutes talking about the fundamental materials you need to create a realist watercolor. I use 300-pound paper. I use it for quite a number of reasons. I use it primarily because it doesn't have to be soaked and taped down and stapled and all that, and therefore I can get to the painting faster. But I would point out that all single sheet watercolor paper has a shipping sizing on it, and you need to rinse that sizing off and let it dry thoroughly before you start your drawing. The 300-pound paper is tougher. It holds up to a lot of abuse. I can do a lot of lifting, and not unlike a lot of watercolorists, I make a lot of mistakes, and I can do a lot of cleaning up and removing color off of a 300-pound paper that I couldn't off of a 90 or 140-pound paper. I use Fabriano's 300-pound soft press paper, and the reason I use that is that unlike a cold press paper, it has lower valleys and lower hills. It's smoother. It's not as smooth as hot press paper and doesn't act like hot press paper. The thing I like about it is that I can do a lot of detail on the surface of this paper, but because it's made with long staple virgin white cotton, I can get the paint into the fibers of the paper and makes beautiful soft edges on the edges of fabrics and things like that that would be more difficult to do on a cold press paper. The final reason I use a 300-pound paper is that when I sell a painting to a collector and I hand it to them, just the structure of the paper and the stiffness of the paper feels like something that's worth the money that they've paid for that fine piece of art. We'll talk later about the paints I use, but fundamentally I have about 12 colors that I use, and then depending on the painting that I'm working on, there are a number of specialty colors that I will use, and we'll talk about those specifically as we move forward. Brushes, I use two different kinds of brushes. I use a Kolinsky round and I use a synthetic round primarily. I have, like every other artist, lots and lots of brushes, and so there will be times I'll use flats, I'll use filberts, I'll use all kinds of other brushes, but the fundamental brush for transparent watercolor is the round. I use the Kolinsky round when I'm painting soft edge things and blending colors and painting wet into wet. And then I use the synthetic brushes when I'm painting a lot of detail and I need the stiffness of the brush to control that detail. The bottom line is that you need a full range of brushes, but traditionally, watercolorists have come back time and time again to the round as their basic brush. When I set up a still life, sometimes I use a black background, a black surface to set the objects on. Sometimes I use a white surface to set the objects on. And if I'm lucky, I may have a really fine table or a chest or something like that where the wood grain adds to the value of the presentation that I'm given. So let's walk over here and let's take a look at a similar setup so I can give you some pointers on how to light and set up the still life. Here I've used a piece of linen to set up the fabric, and there's a lot of ways you can add interest to your still life just by folding or unfolding or tucking the fabric. And so what I may do while I'm photographing it, I may take lots and lots of images of the still life, because it's relatively inexpensive. So the more you take, the more options you're going to have later. And always be looking for the highlights. Turn your objects. Be sure you've got the best sparkle, you've got the best shadows, and you've got the best highlights. One of the key factors is I see a lot of people using a wide-angle lens to photograph their still life. When you do that, these objects tend to get pretty distorted. So I suggest moving the camera back maybe as far as 6 or 8 feet and use a medium range telephoto. That makes all these objects very rigid and vertical. It makes them easier to draw. It also, in the end, makes it easier for your audience to read these objects in your paintings. I think that one of the things we always need to remember is that we're telling a story to the viewers of our paintings. So we want to make it as simple and straightforward as possible so that they have more enjoyment about looking at your watercolor. One of the things you're looking for is the crispest photograph you can possibly obtain, so that when you do your drawing, you've got all the details there. And so the best way to do that is to use the self-timer on your camera and let the camera take the photograph. I see it a lot out there where people push the shutter button and just that movement moves the camera just enough to blur all the details. So don't worry about it. It doesn't matter who takes the photograph. Let the camera do the work. Next, I'd like to talk about how I create the drawing for the still life. I use a projected image. When I first started painting, I used a projected image because I was trying to get to the painting part of doing a watercolor the fastest. I know how to draw, and I can draw very accurately. But what I found was that in using a projected image, I could get a lot more detail into my drawing, because the projected image, particularly today, since we have these higher resolution instruments we can use. When I first started using opaque projectors and overhead projectors, it was very, very difficult to get a lot of detail in my drawing. But we'll see in a minute, these new high resolution projectors make it a lot easier, and we can get a lot more detail into our realism paintings. I want to talk a little bit about the pencils I use, and it seems like it wouldn't be important, but it is very important. I use a 2H lead in a mechanical pencil holder, a mechanical lead holder. The reason we use a 2H is that it puts down a very nice line that's easy to see, but doesn't put down a lot of graphite. Architects and engineers have used a 2H lead for hundreds of years to lay out their drawings because it's easy to see, but it also erases very easily at the end, which is another thing you're going to be wanting when you finish your painting. But at this stage, you want to develop 3 line weights to control the image that you're drawing. The middle line weight is your primary drawing weight. It's what you're going to use to outline the major objects in the still life. The number 1 line weight is the lightest of your line weights, and then that's where you're going to be drawing the tracing from the projection your lightest lines. And then third, you need to develop a heavy line, really bearing down on this 2H lead to mark those areas that you know eventually you want to use your masking fluid on to save it as the white highlights, the sparkle in the painting. So let's go take a look at how to do a projected traced image for your still life. So here we have the still life photo projected on the screen. And you'll notice that I have tilted it 90 degrees. And the reason I've done that is that there are actually two fundamental reasons to do that. Number one, this gets the highest resolution image because I can bring the projector as the closest to the paper itself. The number two reason is a psychological reason, because I want you to, when you're drawing, to think about these as objects, not as a teapot or pears or a crystal bowl, but I want you to see them in the abstract as objects so that you can draw them more accurately. Now, one of the key things to remember is to keep a piece of paper under the ball of your hand, because any oil that is on your hand is going to get transferred to that paper, and it might create a problem for you later, and it will also collect dust over the long period of time. So you start with your hand on the paper and going around an outline, and I usually start with the major subjects first. And I'm doing a slight pressure here, so this is going to be my medium weight line. And I'm trying to be very, very careful that I follow exactly what I'm seeing in the projection. Once I do the whole outline of the bowl, then I'll come back with my lighter line and start to pick up all the details. And what you're going to find is the more details you start to see, the more you're going to see, and they just go on and on and on. But remember, you're the artist, you're in control, so you get to decide what degree of realism you want in your painting. So, as you can tell, this is going to take quite some time. So what you want to do is you want to be sure that the telephone is off, the dog's been taken out, because in a very large painting, a full sheet, it could take 4 or 5 hours to do a drawing of this complexity. Now I come back after I've done all my little details, and then I find those little places that I think are going to be important as highlights, and then I really bear down on the pencil and pick them up as the darkest marks. So let me go around this with my really light line, show you some of the details that I'm picking up here, and then I'll come back with this dark line and show you the details that I'm going to mask later. Now let's take a look at a finished drawing. So you can see here, I've got the darkest line around those things that I know are going to be important to be white in the final painting to pop out those highlights. Now, we also want to be sure that that we are including as much detail as possible at this point in the drawing. So what I suggest to you is bringing the photograph now next to the drawing and see if there aren't some things you missed. For instance, here I didn't catch where the handle attaches to the belly of the pot, and there are a couple of highlights there. It's very difficult to see in the projected image all the details because it's very, very bright, and quite frankly, after a time, your eye gets fatigued. So now's the opportunity to pick up those final details. One of the fundamental tools that I use in masking my paintings is tape. And there are lots of kinds of tape out there. But let me recommend to you a particular type of tape that I found to be very successful. And it's something I've used for a long, long time because it's what I used as an architect to attach my drawings to my drawing board. It's called drafting tape. It's not found in the art supply side of your store. Go over to the side of the store where they sell the architecture and engineering supplies to find the drafting tape. Let me tell you why drafting tape is important. First of all, it's a crepe-based tape, so you actually can bend it as you are masking things. If there are slight bends in it, will save you some cutting later. But the primary reason that you want to use drafting tape is that it's a low-tack, repositionable tape. It means that it won't damage the paper that you're using to paint on. The other thing about it is that the molecules of the tape are so small that they don't allow water to seep under the tape. A lot of people think that artist tape should be used for masking. It's not. Its primary use is just to attach light paintings to the back of mat board. Get some drafting tape and try it, and you're going to find it works so much better. It's what I'm going to be using through the whole process, and I hope that by seeing how I use this, it'll make your painting easier and more fun. So what I've done here is I've attached my paper to my painting board, and as you can see, I'm taping it down all the way around because we're going to be putting a lot of water at times on this paper, and it will tend to buckle a little bit. Not as much as the lighter papers, but even 300-pound paper will buckle a little bit, and I don't want that to influence how the paper receives the pigment. One of the things that I like to do, it's not absolutely necessary, but it has saved me a lot of grief and made painting a lot easier, is to cover my painting with tracing paper. All the painting, and then expose that part of the painting that I'm going to work on that day. It's like a surgeon opening up an area of the body before they make their operation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this tracing paper and I'm going to just tear it using a straight edge. Again, we want to conserve our energy, and we want to make things easy, and we want to make things fast because we want to use most of our time in the painting process, not in the setup process. Now, one of the things I suggest that you also add to your art materials is a natural hair brush. Now, there are all kinds of them out there. You can even get a natural hair house painter's brush. This happens to be a desk brush, probably as an antique at this point. I'm not sure they even make Palomino desk brushes anymore. But the natural hair is the key element here, because as you brush back and forth, the tracing paper picks up static electricity, and that adheres to your watercolor paper and won't shift around while you're taping it in place, and makes it easier to use as you go through the painting process. Now I've affixed the tracing paper over all of the painting. Now, the first thing we're going to paint in this painting is the crystal bowl that holds the pears, and then after that we're going to be painting the pears that stick out above the bowl. So I'm going to go around those objects about 1/8 of an inch outside of the medium weight line that I use to outline those objects. That's another reason to use that medium weight line so that it's easy to see through the tracing paper. Now what I'm using here is a very soft lead, an F lead. And the reason I'm using it rather than the 2H lead is I don't want to have to push down so hard that it makes a groove in the watercolor paper. So it's easy to make a line with an F lead without pushing down hard. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a piece of mat board and I'm going to slide it under the tracing paper. Now I take my X-Acto blade and I recommend this narrow craft knife or X-Acto knife with a number 11 blade. It's easy to hold, it's easy to turn, so when you're cutting curves, it's easier to manipulate the knife blade. The really, really important thing is always have a sharp blade, because once the blade starts to dull out, it's very difficult to turn around curves and to turn even straight areas and get a clean cut in the paper. So what I'm going to do is cut just 1/8 of an inch outside of the soft lead line that I have drawn. And you can see I've used an 8-ply mat board, so I don't have to worry about cutting through the mat board into my painting. All right, so we remove that, and voila, we have exposed the crystal bowl and the pears. Now, we take our drafting tape and we started by drawing our line 1/8 of an inch outside of the object, and then we cut another 1/8 of a line. So the idea is we've ended up with 1/4 of an inch of space here where the tape will adhere to the watercolor paper and give us a good barrier to keep control of the paint and the water. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to mask the outside edges of these shapes we're going to paint. And it would be very tempting to use lots of little bitty pieces of tape to round those corners. But that would be false economy and might create a problem for you, because every time there is a joint in the tape like that, you open up a potential for a leak. And I'll show you how to avoid that. The primary way to avoid that is to use the longest pieces of tape that you can at any one point, because we're going to come back and cut out those shapes. Now at this point, we're going to cover up the pears at the top, because we're going to paint them in a different method, but it will save us a little time if we just do this right this way at this time. Now, back to our X-Acto knife, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the exact edge of these objects. Again, a really important reason to have that middle weight line, so you know exactly where to make your cuts. And here again, attention to detail is important. See all the little scalloped edges at the bottom of this bowl. Now is the time to capture them. And there's a little bitty area of fabric that raises up just in front of the bowl there. It's details like that that are going to really make the difference in realism, a high degree of realism or a low degree of realism. Again, things like the edge of this bowl is not exactly smooth because the facets of the way it's cut create different shapes as you move down the bowl. Now we come back using the back side of your blade to lift the tape. You don't want to use the front side of your blade because all that'll do is cut through the tape and not actually lift the tape. So you use the back side of it, it lifts right up. There we go. We have exposed the bowl and the pairs that are in the bowl. Now, since the tape is directly in contact with the watercolor paper, just use the tip of your finger and lightly burnish the edges to be sure that the tape has adhered to the watercolor paper all around. I'll show you later a reason why that's important and that there are other ways to burnish those edges. But now we're going to move on to using our masking fluid. Now we're going to have an adventure with a masking fluid. There's a lot to know about masking fluid. Let me give you what I think are just the essentials. I use Daniel Smith masking fluid primarily because it dries a very neutral light tan. There are a lot of masking fluids out there that are orange and blue and green, and I've gotten away from using them because they tend to fight the colors that I have in my watercolor, and that's one of the primary reasons that I like this masking fluid. I also think it comes off the paper the easiest of all those that I've tried with the least amount of damage to the paper. One of the key things of any masking fluid is what is the applicator to it. This masking fluid comes with a good applicator. All you do is cut the solid plastic off at a 45-degree angle until you expose where the flow of the tube is. Now, this also comes with these really fine nibs that can be put on here. I found that the pressure of squeezing the masking fluid tends to loosen that, so I attach that real fine nib with a little piece of my drafting tape. Now, it's really important that you have a spare piece of paper available to test the flow of your masking fluid. There are a number of reasons there. You want to be sure, first of all, that you have a flow. Number two is that if there's air trapped in the bottle, you may have a lot of air bubbles coming out. You do not want those. And number two, this gives you a good sense of how lightly, and I stress that word, lightly you want to squeeze that bottle. You want the flow of the masking fluid to primarily just be from gravity, but it takes a little bit of pressure. It's very easy to squeeze it too hard and just create a huge mess in your painting. So being able to judge how much pressure to put behind the squeezing of the bottle onto a scrap piece of paper, and as you can just see, I use a bunch of Post-it notes because they're easy and it's easy to throw them away. Then you see that I have taken out my photo and I place it as close to the object as possible. And I want to emphasize that. We'll talk about that even more later. It's very difficult if you've got a small photograph to see all the details. Therefore, I use a big photograph. And in fact, I even make a really large photograph. And sometimes I cut up this photograph and bring it close to the object that I'm going to be masking or painting. That's particularly true when I'm working on a full-size sheet or an elephant sheet size painting. So I brought my photograph as close to the subject as possible so I can see the highlights and see why I have slightly darker marks in my drawing. I also want to, again, where I'm touching the watercolor paper, I want to put something under my the ball of my hand, again, to keep the oil from my hand from transferring to the paper. So I've got these highlights, and now here I want to emphasize that you are the artist. You are in control of what the final product is. I think there needs to be a highlight just under the shadow of the rim of that bowl. So I'm going to add just a touch of a highlight there. Then I'm going to go around and start picking up those places that I have slightly darker images in my drawing that I know, and I'm cross-referencing them back to my painting. One of the biggest mistakes that I see in the people that take my classes is that they use much too much masking fluid. I mean, if there was ever a case of less is more, this is it. Now, you want to be sure you've got it all, but you don't get carried away. If you step back and more than a 1/16 of your painting is covered in masking fluid, you might as well take it off and start over because you've overmasked significantly. Remember, these are only the places that you want to be white at the end of your painting process. I think you can see that using this really fine little nib here makes it so much easier than trying to use just that big nib that's attached to the bottle. And like everything we're doing in this process, the more accurate you can be, the better you will end up with a high degree of realism, which is the goal of this painting. And what you're going to find after you do this a while, that there are certain characteristics of highlights. They fade off in one direction, they taper off in another direction. So if you can mock the flow of these little details as you apply the masking fluid, then your realism is going to be higher. just got a few more little bits up in here. I love these long S curves that appear in the highlights. That happens pretty frequently. All right, now we need to just let it dry, and that is really important. You don't want to touch it until it is absolutely dry. In getting ready to start painting, there are a few things we need to do. One is waking up our colors. Our colors have sat in the wells of our palette, sometimes overnight. Even if we used them this morning and it's the afternoon, we need to get them back into a liquid state. And so I use a small plastic squeeze bottle. This happens to be a batiking tool. I like it because it has a little metal cap on it and I can get real small dots of water when I need them during the painting process. But it's a pretty handy tool to move a small quantity of water from our water container to the paint. So what I'm doing is just I'm putting a few dots of water into each of the wells of my palette. Now, here's the really important thing about this. This is warm water, or at least lukewarm water. And I'm sure you'll all remember that second law of thermodynamics that you worked so hard in high school to remember. Don't remember that? It's things tend to go into a liquid faster the higher degree of the temperature. So if you're trying to wake up your paint by using the cold water out of your tap, it's going to have to work a lot harder to get into a liquid state. You'll just make it easier for it to work the way you want it to by using warm water. And in fact, I paint with warm water. It helps me get richer colors, it helps the flow of the paint, and in general, just makes it a more enjoyable experience. Now, while that paint is starting to wake up, I'm going to mix a range of grays, which is going to be fundamental to painting the crystal bowl. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a quantity of water to each of these wells. And what I'm doing here, using here is a pretty basic multi-pan palette. It gives me the ability to mix 6 different grays. I'm only going to use 4 in this painting. And I'm going to use neutral tint as my black to mix the grays. And the reason I'm using neutral tint is as a black is, even though in some of the paint we're going to use straight neutral tint and it's going to look really, really black, by the time we add our really rich background black, the neutral tint isn't going to look as black as you thought it did when we applied it, and will give us a good separation between the objects in the still life and the background of the still life. So, and in mixing any paint out there, I never use my finest brushes. I have an old brush here. It's an old synthetic brush that I've had for maybe 30 or 40 years. I just keep the bulk of the paint that builds up in it clean, but I use it to mix with and saving my good brushes. So what I'm going to do is pick up some neutral tint and I'm going to transfer it into each of these wells, and each of these wells will get a lighter amount of that. I can see already that I'm going to need some more color in here and some more pigment in there. All right, now let's test our grays to be sure they are pretty much even steps down the value chain here. I've wet my brush, removed most of the water from it, and now I'm going to test that gray. Nice light gray. clean my brush, force the water out of it, come back. Looking pretty good. I would say we could use a little bit more black in there. Yeah, nice. Again, just a little darker would help. Very good. And now we want a really rich, deep gray. Wonderful. All right. Now we've got a pretty nice range of grays here to work with to create the crystal bowl.
Well, that's Laurin McCracken, and the video is called Watercolor Realism, Silver and Crystal. You can learn more about that video at streamline.art, and you can get a discount today only. Just look in the comments section and you can get that discount code. All right, well, thanks for watching today. By the way, we have a great gift for you. It's called 97 Amazing Painting Secrets. It's yours at 97tips.com. Thanks for watching. I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Fine Art Connoisseur in Plein Air.
Experience the methods Laurin McCracken uses to achieve the highest level of detail in his paintings. Paintings that are so exact that you can't help but reach out and touch each element. The teapot, the crystal bowl, the pears, and the fabric. Then you'll take notice of the rich black background, a look that has brought Laurin much acclaim, and he'll demonstrate for you in the video. More important than the actual objects in the artwork, Laurin helps you incorporate his techniques into your own style of painting, so you'll be able to see and include the finest details found in the things you love to paint. You'll be amazed at how Laurin moves beyond realism to find what is real, the details that actually exist, reflections, shadows, and draping of the fabric, even the imperfections found in the objects. Yet he knows just what to leave out of the painting so the viewer can be involved, allowing them to use their imagination to journey through the piece. Throughout the past 15 years, Laurin has experimented and developed an effective combination of tools and systems that will work to help your realism work come to life. As you watch this award-winning expert work, you'll quickly discover why artists from around the world want to learn from him. Holding nothing back, Laurin emphasizes the importance of solid drawing, an excellent exercise in seeing rather than just looking. You'll be moving beyond what you think something looks like in order to see what it truly looks like. You may even look back at previous paintings and realize how much you missed. Throughout the instruction, drawing, and demonstration, Laurin will encourage you to stop often to see if you're recording the details in a consistent manner and that you haven't skipped small areas, which can be easy to overlook. Laurin will help you properly correct mistakes as you progress through your painting so you can move on with confidence. This allows you to have more fun and create quality paintings that you're satisfied with, rather than giving up or waiting to the end only to find no way of fixing errors. Whether you're new to still life and regardless of your experience with watercolor, you'll benefit from Laurin's outstanding teaching. You'll be learning new skills and refining what you already know and do. This video includes an exhibit of Laurin's work and a high-speed view of the demonstration painting. You'll have access to a downloadable list of materials used, and, as a bonus, Laurin offers tips on still life photography. Available on DVD or instant video. Don't miss your chance to study realism with Laurin McCracken.